911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal, or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my central light came on, and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard. A good-sized man, or something that looks like a man. I don't know what it was, just that it ran across the yard.
Okay. You've had problems in the neighborhood before?
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Deal!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Okay, hang on.
He's right...
Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
Okay.
You're listening to Sasquatch Experience, the podcast. The classic Bigfoot podcast has returned with Sean Forker and Henry May. The show starts now. Good evening, folks. You're listening to the Sasquatch Experience, the podcast. I'm Sean the Fork Shop Forker, joined by Henry May, and later on in the show, we're going to be talking with Eric Altman, and we're going to be discussing Henry, the late Sam Sherry, the legendary Pennsylvania Bigfoot researcher, my friend. But Henry, it's good to be back here in the broadcast booth with you, buddy. Long time no talk.
Yeah, great to be back. Yeah.
We got to dust ourselves off a little bit, you know, get the cobwebs off and get back to action on the stick, which is the microphone. Nothing pornographic for anybody out there listening, because we don't want to be sending those vibes out there. Not that there's anything wrong with those vibes. They're just not our vibes, you know. But Henry, brother, I know you got a lot to talk about. You put on HBM's Crypto Corner out today. Something you and we talked about 12 years ago, man. And it's made its way back again to the forefront of Bigfoot.
The Massacre Theory Redux is what I called my latest HBM's Crypto Corner. And that's what it is, because this guy, Steve Isdall, who has this channel, howtohunt.com, has... Well, he called John Green a bastard, a lying bastard, which is, I don't like that. And he says, Bob Gimlin, we're coming after you. We're going to tell the truth about this. And he's implicating that Bobby Short was murdered. Crazy.
Now that's downright insane. And I was friends with Bobby.
Implying that...
You know, I was friends with Bobby, Henry. You were friends with Bobby. And towards the end, she was, you know, apparently espousing theories we didn't agree with, but doesn't negate the fact that she was always good to us. Do you know what I mean? And
yeah, but I tell you, the last few years that she was around, she would PM me and say, "You don't know what you're talking about, Henry. You don't know what happened. You don't know." She kept telling me, "Don't talk about things you don't know anything about." Because she said that Renee DeHinden told her there was something strange about the PG film, that something happened. I highly doubt that.
So my question is, for you on that point, Henry, why would she wait so long to say that? Renee died in what, 2000? Renee died before I really got into the field. You know what I mean? Before I really joined up with you and really got immersed and into the internet culture of Bigfoot at the time. I really wasn't, aside from his books, that familiar with Renee. He's not the kind of guy that would sit on that information. So go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off on that. I just had to make that point. Renee's not the guy that would just sit there and say, "Yeah, this happened years ago," and that was a bad DeHinden. I'm sorry. That was terrible. I'll stick to my day job.
And as I mentioned when we were talking before we went on the air, if this had actually happened, they would not have come out with just a film. They would have come out with a body part or a body and presented it and said, "Here it is. here's a body or here's a part of a body. This is it right here. Look what we did. We shot these Bigfoot, and this is it. Do with it what you will. You know, why only present a film if you've got the goods?
Absolutely. You know, I guess the other thing is, how do you go and say that Bobby was murdered? I don't understand that.
I don't know.
She was killed by a tomato, an infection, right? That's what killed her, like an infection. Nobody murdered her. And who the hell's going to murder her? I mean, all the guys that were associated with it ain't, you know, what, Bob Gimlin went and killed her? Like, come on. It's ridiculous. Like, there's some Canadian G-men out there that move through the darkness of night or through counter means to kill Bigfoot investigators because of films shot over 50 years ago? Come on. Even Beckyard would say that's ridiculous. And if John Eric Beckyard and I could agree on something, I tell you what, hell has frozen over, and Eric would know because he's down there. Don't die on me. I need you up here. And, like, that's just not going to happen. And I don't know how people can be espousing these theories when there's what is their evidence, Henry? What's their case? What have they shown to prove that this is true?
Good question. Good point. Then now they also claim, well, there was also a massacre at Blue Creek Mountain. They say there was one at Blue Creek Mountain and one at Bluff Creek.
I guess it always travels the creeks.
You know, M.K. Davis, he saw the footage that was combined of the Blue Creek Mountain footage and the PG film, and he thought, hey, we found some more footage of the PG film from the PG film. It's like, no, that footage was shot. The Blue Creek Mountain footage was shot at least 2 months before the PG film.
I think it's garbage, Henry. I think people really need to get new hobbies. Stick to making really bad YouTube videos with wind effects and move on. And there's Eric joining us. Hey, buddy.
There's Eric.
Hey, guys.
Having a conversation about the Bluff Creek Massacre here.
Oh, brother.
That's what we said.
What a joke.
And folks, you're hearing between the three of us, there's 25, 35, there's almost 100 years of research experience here between all of us. All right. 100 years. How many years does Itchy Balls have? What's his name?
Steve Isdall.
Yeah, Isdall, not Itchy Balls. Isdall. Okay. We'll just call him Itchy Balls. Like, if the three of us can sit here beyond, like, and look, guys, and Eric, I said this before you joined us, and thanks for joining us tonight, buddy. If we can sit here and agree that the only fact we have is that a film was shot in 1967, the rest of this is all up for conjecture. We know one thing, a film was shot. Everything else is of the words of the people involved, and now they want you to go one step further and believe the words of people that had nothing to do with it.
Yep.
Have people gone mad?
Yep.
Wow. Sweet Baby Jesus. That's the name of the beer I'm taking a sip of right now by Duclaw. Check it out. Go to your beer distributor and get some. It's the beer of the night. Sweet Baby Jesus. Final thoughts on that, Henry, before we move on?
It's rank insanity. It really is. It's the entire thing. The whole deal is just crazy. There is no evidence. There's no dead bodies. No shell casings. If there were somebody, C. Cole suggested, why didn't somebody take a metal detector down to the film site to look for shell casings?
Mm-hmm. Good point. Who knows? We'll never know. Eric, you got a thought on this before we cap it off?
No, I'm not wasting my time.
That's because he's a smart man. Guys, anyhow, let's move on to more important things. But folks, Eric Altman's joining us. Eric Altman, longtime tenured Pennsylvania Bigfoot researcher, was the director of the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society up till 2016. My mentor, the guy I owe most of my Bigfootery fame to, really taught me the ropes. One of my former co-hosts. We could sit here and talk all night about Eric's credentials and our relationship. But we're here to talk about, actually, I think somebody who was an inspiration to Eric, I know an inspiration to me, and Henry, you've blogged about him many times in the past, was Mr. Sam Sherry from Wilpon, Pennsylvania. Eric, it's a good time to talk about people like Sam.
Sam was quite the colorful character when I knew him. Unfortunately, I didn't get to know Sam until very late in his life, but the years that I got to know him, he was quite the colorful character, very enigmatic. It was a joy to be around because he was always very positive, full of energy, really full of hope that he was going to capture one of these things with one of his snares that he had created. So it was always a pleasure to be around Sam. I have so many interesting Sam stories I could share with you tonight. I don't think we have enough time to, but it was a real pleasure knowing Sam for as long as I was able to. And unfortunately, he passed away in 2008. But I knew both he and his wife, and I spent a good portion of my early research career getting to know Sam and spending a lot of time in the Chestnut Ridge area of southwestern Pennsylvania, investigating new cases as well as following up on some old things. So,
yeah, and Chestnut Ridge today has become an area of interest again. It's always been an area of interest for us in Pennsylvania, but because of films like Invasion on Chestnut Ridge by Seth Bridlove and other documentaries, the area is really gaining a lot of attention now from everyday people, not just Bigfoot researchers. But I don't think it's quite fair to be able to explore the mysteries of the ridge without talking about the people that walked it far before we did, right? People that really laid the groundwork and did the investigating up there. And Sam's not the only one. Sam we choose because he's probably the most colorful, the most prominent. But you also have to look at guys like Bob France, Eric, Bigfoot Bob France, and others that... And Bob's still out there, isn't he?
Yeah, Bob is in his 80s now, his mid-80s. And I just talked to him on the phone this past weekend. It's been a while since I've caught up with him, but I did catch up with him, and he's still just as colorful as Sam was. Bob, of course, for those who don't know Bob France, Robert Dale France, he had several encounters. He had a sighting in the early 1990s. He liked to go up in the mountains and camp by himself, and he had several campsites that were very remote campsites, and he would camp. And one day he had a sighting. The rest, as they say, is history. He got involved with Sam Sherry, Dr. Paul Johnson of Duquesne University, who is an author, longtime investigator in Pennsylvania. He's been investigating cases since the 1970s. And, of course, our mentor, Stan Gordon, knew Bob. But as far as Sam goes, Sam has a very interesting history himself. Sam was an outdoorsman, fisherman, hunter, trapper, and he lived over in a little village outside of Ligonier, Pennsylvania called Wilpon, and it sits on the eastern foothills of the Chestnut Ridge. And for folks who don't know what the Chestnut Ridge is, just really quickly, it's a 100-mile long, furthest western ridge of the Appalachian Mountains. However you pronounce it. I call it Appalachia. I'll probably get corrected on it. But it's the furthest west ridge of the Appalachians, and it runs from Indiana County, Pennsylvania, through Westmoreland, through Fayette, and down to Preston County, West Virginia, where it kind of dies off. 100 miles long, about 2 to 3 miles wide, and I think the range of it is maybe 2,000 feet above sea level. So it's not really high in some places, but a few places it gets a little high. But gorgeous area, as you mentioned. It's a very mysterious area. There's a long history of creature sightings, and not just Bigfoot, but Thunderbird sightings, UFO sightings, strange and unusual sounds that people hear, booming sounds that come from underneath the ground that sound like large machinery operating. So it has a long storied history of all kinds of weird phenomenon. And getting back to Sam, Sam was a long-time hunter, trapper, fisherman, loved spending time in the outdoors. And in the late 1980s, I believe it was either 1986 or 1987, he went to a place just outside of Ligonier, Pennsylvania, called the Sleepy Hollow Spillway. And the Sleepy Hollow Spillway is, it's basically a roadway that crosses over the Loyalhanna Creek in southwestern Pennsylvania that runs from Ligonier down into Latrobe and then back up north again. And it's not a very big creek, but it's a very popular spot for fishermen and outdoorsmen and people raft and swim in the creek and whatnot. But he was there on that evening around 11:30 at night. He wanted to do some night fishing, and he pulled his car into a parking area and parked his vehicle, and he got his gear out of the vehicle. As he was walking over to get set up, he began to hear movement in the brush, and he would hear crackling, rustling, like something big was moving around, but he never saw anything. And then he began to hear what he described as monkey chatter and whistling and whooping and all kinds of commotion. But again, when he put his flashlight over there, where the sounds were coming from, he saw nothing. So he went back to the concentrating on fishing, and all of a sudden he heard movement, and he turned to look, and there was this creature standing right at the edge of the tree line, probably about maybe 50 yards from him at the time, maybe a little closer than that. I'm just going by memory. He looked at this thing and with his flashlight, and this thing didn't look like your typical Bigfoot. It was probably, as he described it, between 7 and 8 feet tall, had long arms that hung down well below its knees. On the top of its head, it had a patch of hair, much like a mohawk, but it didn't have any other hair on its face, except for that it came down around the sides of its ears and then like right below its eyes. The body was almost a leathery-looking skin, a grayish-colored skin, very dark, worn-looking skin. It had patches of hair on it, and as Sam explained to me, it looked as if it almost had mange. It suffered from real bad mange. It seemed to be scratching itself to places. Mm-hmm. So Sam looked at this thing for a few minutes, and he wasn't afraid of it, more just startled that it just appeared. So he began to turn and walk away with his fishing gear back towards the car. And he got within a few feet of the car, and I remember Sam telling me this thing was so fast that it seemed almost like it glided from where he originally saw it, and it brushed up against his coat and his arm. It was that quick. But he never heard it step on the ground. Like he said, it almost like glided right to where he was. And it brushed up against him. Sam got in the car, had his window down, his driver's side window down. He went to start the car up, and this thing literally leaned down, pushing its weight and its hands down on the driver door with the open window. And it was pushing the car down into the mud and the gravel, so Sam couldn't leave. Sam said, he looked at this thing, he called it Biggie. He said, all right, Biggie, if you keep pushing down on my car, you're going to pop my tire. And that's when this thing stuck its head in the window within literally inches of Sam's face. It was breathing on Sam, spitting on him as it gasped and wheezed. And Sam described the breath as being almost like a really bad seafood type of smell, like rotten fish. He yelled at it again and said, okay, Biggie, you're going to have to back up. You're going to pop my tires. That's when this thing stood up and basically took its hands off of the window. Sam started up his car and drove away. According to Sam, in his taillights, he saw this creature standing there with its arm extended out, almost as if it was waving goodbye at him. Sam went home, and for the next 2-3 days, he didn't say anything to his wife, Naomi. He didn't tell her about what happened. He just kept to himself, was real quiet. Finally, she got it out of him about what he saw and experienced, and she said, well, you should contact somebody about this and report your experience and your sighting. So, of course, Sam reached out to Stan Gordon, filed a report with him. And then about, I guess, maybe 6 months to a year later, he reached out to Dr. Paul Johnson, and Paul went up to meet Sam at his house, and that's how they got to know Sam and shared his experience. And then from there, Sam caught the Bigfoot bug and bound and determined to catch one of these things. And he actually had sent off to several companies to have very large snares made that he could set up in the woods that he could try to capture this thing. And unfortunately, as I said, Sam passed away in 2008, but he never succeeded in capturing one of these creatures. But he did have another sighting of a female creature a few years later on. But that's a basic summary of Sam's sighting that took place at the Sleepy Hollow Spillway just outside of Ligonier, Pennsylvania.
I remember when you took me there. It was me, Ron Gallucci, and James Baker, and a couple others. You took us there. And there's just something different about being in a place where famous sightings happened. It was chronicled, by the way, if you folks want to read about the story, it's in Paul Johnson's book, Dr. Paul Johnson's book, Chasing the Pennsylvania Bigfoot. There's a image in the book as well, and I think Lauren Coleman's talked about it a few times. It's a pretty famous Pennsylvania Bigfoot sighting. In fact, I sent Eric a link this morning. When you type in Loyal Hannah Creek, his sighting is in a brief blurb on the Wikipedia page, which is pretty cool. That it's made that kind of a cultural impact. He seemed to be such a cool guy. I never got to meet Sam. He passed away before I had the pleasure, but got to know Bob France and got to hang out with John Vukovic. A lot of the people that did spend a lot of time out in the Chestnut Ridge. I'm just glad none of us ever got caught by one of those snares.
Well, he had some pretty unique ideas about how to capture a Bigfoot. And one of my first outings in the woods with him, he took me to an area where I actually had a very close encounter experience with a black bear, and I'll share that with you in a minute. But he took me to an area where private property, and according to Sam, when you went out with him, Sam knew everybody and everybody knew Sam. I found out later that wasn't the case, but that was his claim. Everybody knew him. Everybody knew he was the Bigfoot guy, and he could go on anybody's property. He had permission from everybody. So he took me up on the lower end of the ridge on the eastern side. We drove up this back mountain road. We came to a dead end, and we parked the vehicle, and he said, "Follow me, I want to show you something." So, of course, I was interested to see what he was up to, and I followed him up on the hill. We walked probably about 150, 200 yards into the woods and came to this clearing, and he devised some homemade traps, some homemade bait methods. And at the time, I was thinking to myself, this is ludicrous. Why would anybody in their right mind do it? But I could, from his point of view, I could see thinking they might have actually worked. And what he did was he had a bucket nailed to a tree about 7 feet off the ground that he filled with trout that he had caught from the Loyal Hannah Creek. And he shoved the whole trout full of sleeping pills. And he wanted the Bigfoot to, of course, come and take the trout, eat the trout, and the sleeping pills would knock him out, and then he'd be able to tie the Bigfoot up and take it back to his house. The other method he did was in a hollowed-out tree, he put a pie pan in the tree, filled it with beer, and put more sleeping pills in the pie pan. And his thinking of that was, once the Bigfoot ate the trout, it would be thirsty, so it would see the pie pan full of beer and drink the beer that had the tranquilizer sleeping pills in it, and that would be a double whammy, and of course knock the Bigfoot out. And he took me out and showed me these, and I somewhere I still have pictures of the bucket with the fish in it, the pie pan. And the first time we went out, he was setting the stuff up. And we walked back to the vehicle, and as we were coming out of the forest, the no trespass area forest, we ran into a guy that was pulling up on scene asking us what we were doing. And, of course, it was the guy who owned the property. We did not have permission to be on the property. Sam began talking to him, telling the guy who he was and telling him about his Bigfoot experience and sighting. And of course, the guy heard about Sam. He didn't know Sam, but he heard about him. So he let us go and said, I really don't want you guys up here. There's black bear and there's rattlesnakes and a couple copperheads I've seen up here. So I don't want you getting up here and hurt on my property. So, of course, later on, Sam ignored that and took me back to the area again. And I'll tell you that a little bit about that here in a few minutes. But getting back to the no trespassing thing, before we left, I walked over to the gentleman and I said, I apologize for us being on your property without permission. Sam told me that he knew you and we have permission to come on. If I had known this wasn't true, I would not have come on the property. He said, no, it's okay. I don't mind you going on the property. I just want you to be aware there's black bear, there's rattlesnakes and copperheads up in there everywhere. So just if you're going to go up there, just be careful. And it's no problem. That's fine. And on the way back, I told Sam as we were driving back to his house, I said, we got to be careful where we go, places that are marked no trespassing, because this guy was nice enough to say, okay, that's fine, I understand, but the next guy may not be so friendly, and we may get guns pulled out on us. He may call the police on us. We don't know what's going to happen. So you need to be very careful with whose property you're going on. Getting back to this location, about a week later, Sam called me up. At this point in Sam's life, his vision's starting to get pretty bad, so he can't drive a vehicle on his own. So he has an old Chevy Blazer that he asked me to drive him up to this location. So I did. We got back up there, and we hiked into the woods to the clearing. And lo and behold, the trout were gone from the bucket, and the pie pan was empty. There was no beer in it. It was probably evaporated. But he was insistent that Bigfoot came and took the trout and drank the beer in the pie pan and wanted us to do a perimeter search and search for this Bigfoot. Well, I knew there was no Bigfoot around. I figured probably a raccoon had taken the trout, and probably the pie pan with the beer in it evaporated, and that was what was left. But he was always insistent that there was still a Bigfoot up there sleeping, or passed out or sleeping somewhere in the vicinity where the food was left for it. So,
Henry, what do you think about that?
Wow.
Eric, in all our years we've known each other, you told me he made traps. You never told me about the traps.
Yeah. And that's just one experience that probably one of my first ones with him. Like I said, I had an experience up there with a black bear. I went up to that area at night just for my own curiosity's sake without Sam. And there's a pretty big rock outcropping up there that you can literally sit on with your back to the forest, and there's a drop off with your back to the forest, probably about 10, 15 feet to the forest floor. So I went up there one night and sat on the rock, and it was about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. The only thing I really had on me was some bear mace and a flashlight, and I think maybe a pocket knife, and that was it. And I wasn't really expecting anything to happen, but I figured, at least I can see I came up here and I watched this area at night and I didn't see anything. Well, probably about a half an hour after me arriving and sitting on that rock, I began to hear something moving towards me that was very big. And it didn't sound to me like it was a quadruped stepping. It sounded more like bipedal stepping. And I'm listening to this thing and I'm hearing crunch, crunch, crunch through the leaf litter and the foliage on the ground, and I'm thinking, what the heck is coming up on me? And I was actually really nervous and worried about turning around to see what was there. Finally, I got up enough courage as this thing was almost on top of me. I turned around and hit my flashlight, and there's probably a 300 or 400 pound black bear standing there at the bottom of the rock looking up at me. And I was like, oh, crap. So it eventually took off. I scared it off. It ran off, and I didn't have any issues. But I never went back up to the area by myself again. I learned my lesson.
Yeah, I don't go anywhere by myself just because of bear. And they are prevalent in Pennsylvania. You will stumble upon them. And whether you think Bigfoot's real or not, folks, I mean, you probably do. You're listening to a Bigfoot show. But the bears sure are. And they're not as fearful as some people may think they are. I broke a good umbrella or two up on the Chestnut Ridge.
You did.
Yeah.
I remember that.
It's the first time you took me up there. I was walking over this rock pile, and I was using the umbrella as a stabilizer, Henry. Mm-hmm. The umbrella broke, and I folded myself up like an accordion between two rocks, a log, and in between that little valley there was full of water, and my ass was soaked from thigh to chest, and I had to ride back with was it with you or was it with the Dragasons, Eric, with my ass hanging out the Jeep trying to dry myself off?
I think it was the Dragasons. Yeah,
it was a good time. These are the remarkable things about the research. It's not always about the Bigfoot story. Sometimes it's literally about the people you meet when you're doing that, and they make it so much more enjoyable, sometimes a little bit more frustrating, as in Eric's case, where you're trespassing and you don't know it. And it's not the first time that's ever happened to any of us. And it won't be the last time, I'm sure. But, Pennsylvania is kind of weird like that, too, Eric, though. One minute you can be on public land, and the next minute, one step, you're in somebody's property.
Yeah. And that area actually where he took me to is now developed. People have built homes up in that area, and they've logged and forested a lot of the area. So there's a lot more urban sprawl up there than there was back in the late 1990s when I first went up there with Sam. Yeah, he was such an interesting character. I introduced our mutual friend Ronald Murphy to him. I introduced a lot of folks to him. John Vukovic, Joe Biello, Bigfoot researcher from New York. A lot of people that were in the PBS are just starting out with the group. I was hoping to take you out there, Sean, to meet him, but unfortunately he passed.
Yeah,
but a lot of people got to meet Sam and sit on his front porch and listen to him retell his story about his encounter at the Sleepy Hollow spillway. And just to share a funny little side anecdote with you guys, I had heard his story so many times over those 4 or 5 years that I was spending with Sam. I mean, I could almost recount it verbatim, because he told it so often and to so many different people. And one afternoon, John Vukovic and I went up there, and I think we were meeting Bob France and Joe Nemenich. And Joe was an eyewitness from Pennsylvania back in the mid-1980s, and he became friends with Sam as well. And we were all sitting on Sam's porch, and Sam was going through his recounting of his experience. And I'd heard it so many times. I was sitting in a chair at the other side of the porch, and I dozed off. And John was over there looking at me, and I started to snore. John kept kicking me with his boot, like trying to get me to wake up. And Sam, the whole time, Sam never heard me snore. He wasn't paying attention. He just went on with the story from start to finish and never realized I dozed off on his porch.
I mean, they could have quizzed you and you would have had it down by then. I mean, I think even now to this point, you could tell this story like it's second nature.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sam, he would write to the local paper. There was 2 papers in the area, actually, the Ligonier Echo and the Latrobe Bulletin. And you can still find these articles that Sam has written to them. I still have a couple of them in my newspaper archives. He would write to the editor of the paper and recount his research, what he was doing, and the latest updates on Bigfoot in the area. And they would print his letter to the editor. It was almost like a Sam Sherry corner, where you could read the paper every so often, every couple weeks, and there was a new letter from Sam updating everybody what was going on, the Bigfoot activity, if they were moving around, if they weren't as active, and he was becoming a pretty well known figure in the Ligonier Latrobe area at that time. So I guess he assumed that everybody knew him, so that's why he went on a lot of private property and trespassing.
The land belonged to him. And, he was a veteran. Yeah. He did serve his country. He was a good dude. And, the sad part about life as you get older, and then you're not here anymore, and that sucks. But what a legacy he left, and it lives on, and the spirit lives on with everybody associated with him, and all the research that's still going on, all the research that's happening. But you did say something that's rather depressing, and it's become depressing the more and more we learn. A lot of our stomping grounds are becoming deforested.
Yeah.
From where we had a bunch of us had that encounter in 2005 that we up on in Keystone State Park, to some areas in Derry, to the areas on the ridge up to Clearfield County. A lot of these areas now are just getting torn up and developed. You wonder how much longer we're going to have the Chestnut Ridge as it is to go to.
I was just up there, as a matter of fact. It's been about a couple of years. I've been focusing most of my research in Fayette County on the southern end of the ridge, but I haven't been up to the northern end of the ridge for about a year or two. So I took a drive up there last 2 weeks ago. I was filming for an upcoming Bigfoot film. After I was done filming my interview and the segment, I decided to take a drive through some of these areas that have been known Bigfoot hotspots back in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s, like Gray Station, Hillside Village, and Bear Cave, and actually heading up over the mountain through the Ligonier Dairy Ridge Road
And I did notice at the bottom of the ridge on the western side, near the little town of Derry and through the villages throughout Derry, a lot of that is being forested. I saw a lot of foresting that had been done pretty close to the road. But as I got closer to the top of the ridge and cresting the ridge before I was going down to the Ligonier side of it, there was still a lot of wildlife and still a lot of area up there that hasn't been forested. And as a matter of fact, I believe it was either the State Game Commission or Department of Natural Resources posted cooperation signs up there that supposedly whoever owned that property up there has allowed either the DNR or the Game Commission to go in there and preserve that land. So there is a good portion of it still that's pretty wild and pretty remote.
Wonderful. Hopefully it stays that way. Henry, you got any questions about Sam or any comments?
Well, I didn't know him, but I knew of him. I'd read several things about him, about some of his encounters. Pretty interesting stuff. He seemed to be pretty well on top of things. I think I saw his sighting recounted. I think it was in Invasion on Chestnut Ridge. Mm-hmm. I think it was.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I forgot that.
Very interesting sighting.
You know, because like Eric said, you hear that story for so long and you know it. It's you often sometimes forget that these reenactments and stuff happen about them because you just know them. Being there, Henry, is a completely different experience, though. When you can see the spillway, it's pretty cool. I enjoyed my trip there. Eric took us through the tour of the place, really gave us some really good behind the scenes. I don't know, Eric, if anybody that could give a tour like that. You know what I mean?
When I decided in 97 to start doing research myself and getting out into the field and investigating, I had a lot of historical knowledge on these areas where these events occurred. So that's what I first started to do. I drove to these locations, found them myself, explored them myself, because I wanted to see what they looked like. Even if they had changed from 1987 or 1973, I still wanted to get an idea of what the area looked like. So I've been to those areas countless times, especially the spillway, because in 2007 there was a sighting at the spillway a little bit further up from where Sam had his sighting. And I can get into that in a second, but a lot of these areas I became familiar with from me going up there and learning them. Plus, Sam and I went back to the spillway. And actually, Sam took some pretty prominent researchers back in the day with him. Don Keating, Bill Brand, Dr. Paul Johnson, of course. There were some other pretty well-known researchers that went out to visit Sam, and Sam took them to the sighting location where they had their sighting and where he had his sighting and showed them the area. So it's become a pretty well-known spot for fishing and, of course, for Sam's sighting. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of other newer researchers have gone to that area.
Yeah, it's pretty prominent area now, and it's not like it's a hidden gem or hard to find. You can find it on a map. You can find it in GPS. This 2007 encounter, Eric, can you tell us a little bit more about that? I remember it vaguely, but I don't remember all the details.
Yeah, it happened in 2007 in the spring, and there was a younger man. He was probably in his, I want to say, early to mid-20s, and he was an Iraqi war veteran, and he had lost his leg due to an IED on the road exploding in his convoy, and it took his leg. So he suffered from not only the physical injury, but he had post-traumatic stress pretty bad. And there were a lot of nights that he couldn't sleep, and the only therapy he found that worked for him was going fishing at night. So being from the area and knowing that area is a great spot for trout fishing, and especially late at night, there's not many people there, he decided to go to the area to do some fishing. This was very, very early in the morning, and he arrived, he parked his vehicle, and he does have a prosthetic leg, so he's able to walk with it. But he walked up the embankment probably about 50 to 100 yards from where he parked his vehicle, and he was fishing. And while he's fishing, he's looking around. He doesn't have a flashlight on at the time. He's just fishing in complete darkness. And the hollow is open enough that If it's a moonlit night, you'll get some light in there, but for the most part, it's pretty dark. So he's just kind of standing fishing right on the bank, and he happens to take a look to his left about maybe 75 yards away, and he sees a figure standing in the creek. And he's thinking to himself, well, that's kind of odd. I didn't see a car parked in the spillway area, so I didn't see another fisherman. So he calls out to the person, and there's no response. So he figures, well, maybe I'll walk out and see if the person's okay, if he needs help. And he starts walking towards this figure, and he yells out again, hey, buddy, are you okay? And the figure goes from a standing position to a crouched position in the creek, almost like if it's trying to hide. And he got closer to it, turns his flashlight on, and shines his flashlight on this, what he thought was a bear crouched down. And then it stood up. And when it stood up, it raised its arm almost as if to shield its face from the light being in its face, kind of like blocking its eyes. There you could see it definitely wasn't a bear. It looked like a very, as he called it, a very dirty, hairy hippie. It was covered head to toe with hair. It looked very human looking. Had very long arms with the hair hanging off. He said probably 3 to 4 inches in length. It was a reddish brown in color, if I remember correctly. And he just stood there and looked at it and was just amazed at this thing looking back at him. And the thing turned and just walked away across the creek, up the embankment, and disappeared into the woods. And he got a hold of the PBS, the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society. Myself, Dave Dragson, and a few others went with him. We actually met him first for breakfast, sat down and talked to him about his encounter. He very frankly and openly shared his experience. And then he offered to take us back and showed us the location where he had a sighting. And again, from where he had a sighting in 2007, almost 20 years after Sam had his sighting, it's literally maybe 150, 200 yards apart from each other.
It's just so cool. I remember the sighting now with the veteran, and from the I remember this story, this encounter. Eric, with all the time you spent with Sam and got to know him as a person, did you ever think maybe he was a little off base or too invested?
Yeah, he was very obsessed with he became obsessed after a sighting to the point where that became his life. I mean, he was retired when he had his encounter, and he had a lot of free time, but that became his life. And he opened up a little, I'm talking very, very small little corner in his house where he had a display case where he had 2 Bigfoot casts in there. He called it the Chestnut Ridge Bigfoot Research Center. And people, I guess, would come from all around to see Sam and see his Bigfoot casts. And as he got older, you could tell he was losing his facilities and starting to wane in his memory, and his story began to change. And there were some points in it where it changed so much it was like, oh boy, that's not what happened. But you let him go and you let him tell his story.
Absolutely.
That was he was reliving a memory as best he could. But actually, he passed away in 2008. He was in a nursing home, and I hadn't seen him since probably about 2005. His health went downhill, and I had started branching out with the PBS and moving on to other areas to research. But shortly after 2008, he passed away. His wife, Naomi, called me and asked me to come out to the house because she said Sam had left something for me. And I was kind of surprised. I was like, sure, I'll come out. It's not a problem. So I drove out and met with Naomi, and she invited me into her home and sat down. We were talking, and she went back to her bedroom and came out from her bedroom with these 2 beautiful Bigfoot plaster casts that Sam had on display in his little Bigfoot Research Center, their corner of the house. And she said Sam wanted me to have them, and I was so touched. They were beautiful castings. That I actually donated those casts to Rick Fisher's Paranormal Museum because I didn't want them in my possession to get ruined. And I felt they'd be better off on display for everybody to enjoy.
And I think, wow. You talk about Rick Fisher, he's another guy that's, wealth of knowledge of Pennsylvania paranormal Bigfoot research. And I think it was cool that, you were able to get those as somebody who would preserve them and take care of them like Rick has. It's just awesome. So many people intertwined with Sam, through Sam, or because of some of his stories and, lifelong friends. Pretty awesome. Henry, go ahead there. I stepped.
No, I was just saying, wow. I mean, that's pretty neat that Eric donated those to a museum like that.
Yeah, I think there's one up with Lauren Coleman, too, isn't there, Eric?
I think it's a replica,
Gotcha.
A copy. I don't know if the casts were legitimate or not. There was a lot of questions and controversy whether they were real or not, because I had Dr. Meldrum look at the cast before I gave it to Rick, the one with a very pronounced large big toe and the 4 smaller toes, and Dr. Meldrum felt that was not a legitimate cast. He said there's no way the foot's anatomically correct to support a creature based on the shape and design, so it may not have been. The other cast, I believe Paul Johnson told me it was fabricated, but again, I have no way to prove yes or no. It was a 3-toed clawed track. It was probably about 23 inches long, and Sam recounted to me, and I have no way to prove this. I've never heard of it before or after, and I know there's no record of it anywhere that I can find. But Sam told me this story. Every 20 years, these creatures would come around, and he called them true giants, where they were 15 to 20 feet tall. They were much more aggressive and dangerous than your typical Bigfoot. And they would come around. They migrated into the area every 20 years. They had 3-toed tracks or 3-toed feet with claws on them. They were very aggressive. They would destroy parts of forest. They would kill all the wildlife in the forest. They would attack people if the people would encroach on their habitat. And I could never find anything to substantiate that or to validate it. But that was one of the stories that Sam shared with me. And he told me that one of the castings, the 3-toed clawed track that he gave to me, which I gave to Rick, actually came from one of the true giants. So I don't know if there's any truth to it. You could check with Paul Johnson on that for sure. He might be able to add some more to the story or not. But that was one of the stories that Sam used to retell to me and anybody else who came to visit him.
Yeah, I got to get Dr. Paul on here or find a place to sit down and talk with him. Maybe we can arrange that at some point this year, Eric. I'll get the old recorder out and we could sit down and do a remote with him, because he's another... Pennsylvania, again, a state you can't appreciate the past researchers and current researchers enough. Like, there's such a history, and the fact that for many years we were all so able to work together.
If you want, I'll share another funny Sam story with you.
You share as many as you want, brother.
All right. This was probably in 2001, maybe 2002, and we were doing a Bigfoot expedition with the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society, and I had taken some of the not newer members, but the founding members out to meet Sam, and we had a nice day with Sam, and Sam wanted us to take him up to his trapping area, which I talked about earlier, where he had the trout and the pie pan with the beer and fertilizer. So we wanted to take him up there, and I agreed, and I drove Sam's Blazer up to the site while everybody followed me up in vehicles. Now, at this time, as I said, this road was pretty desolate, and there wasn't any houses on it. It was just a back mountain road. And we drove up to the location, and we parked, and there was about 4 or 5 cars in our convoy. We parked on the side of the road, and I told the guys, I said, why don't we just wait here instead of all of us tromping into the trespassed area? We don't want to go trespassing and I'll get in trouble. But me and Sam will go in there and get what Sam needs to get, and we'll come back. And they agreed to stay at their vehicles while Sam and I went in. And Sam wanted to go into that area and retrieve some of the garbage that he left there, to pick up some of the bait that he left there, whether it be trout or the pie pan or whatever he was putting out. He was putting out apples and a bunch of different things. So I walked back with him, and I was looking around the area looking for any kind of sign, footprints, tracks, broken branches, tree stackings, anything I could find. And I'm kind of wandering around, and Sam was cleaning up his mess that he had made from all the baiting. And we headed back to the vehicle, and I didn't know that the items with him. I didn't know he threw it in a bag and carried the stuff back to the vehicle. So we got in the car,
got in the Blazer, and we turned around and started heading down the mountain. As we're heading down the mountain, I'm getting this horrid, absolutely disgusting, horrid odor that was wafting through the windows of the open car. I'm like, holy crap, that stinks. And I mean, it was to the point where my eyes were watering and I was gagging. So wretched. Being a young and naive researcher at the time, I'd always heard stories that Bigfoot is accompanied by this horrid smell. And I would catch whiffs of it and I'd be like, oh, there it is again. And it would go away. So I stopped the vehicle and I got out and Sam was like, what are you doing? What are you doing? I said, I don't know, Sam. I'm smelling something really horrible up here. Something either died or it might be a Bigfoot. I'm going to go check it out. So I'm running around looking in the woods and in and out of the woods. And I run back to the cars. And I'm like, guys, there's something up here. Horrible, horrible smell. And they're getting out of their vehicles. They're all excited. And we're starting to go into the woods looking around, not seeing anything. And the further we got into the woods, the less we smelled the horrible smell. We started coming out of the woods. We could smell it again. And I'm like, what is that? So I walk over to the back of Sam's Blazer. I'm standing there talking to Joe Biello and a couple of the researchers. We're trying to figure out where the smell is coming from. And Joe says, I think it's coming from the back of Sam's truck. So we open the tailgate of his truck, and sure enough, Sam had collected all the rotten trout and all the garbage, the rotten spoiled apples, and he had them in a little bag that he left unopened, or I should say open in the back of his Blazer, and it was sitting in it. That's what was stinking up the truck so badly. And he never told me that he did that. He put it in there. I never saw him do it. And when I told him what I was smelling, he didn't say, oh, that's the garbage. He just let me go run around the woods looking for a possible Bigfoot when it was the garbage that was to blame.
Go figure, right? Eric, thanks for coming on with us, man, and sharing some great stories about Sam Sherry. Any final thoughts you want to put out there for everybody, Eric, on Sam?
For those who didn't know Sam, you missed out on missing a truly genuine, colorful character. You hear the stories about mountain men and some of these veteran Bigfoot researchers throughout time, and you wish you had the chance to meet them, but you never could. I was fortunate enough to meet Sam and share his experience and share many, many trips to the Chestnut Ridge with him. He was a true character for sure and a good friend. And if anybody's interested in seeing what Sam looked like or reading about Sam, if you go on Google or Yahoo or even Facebook and type in the name Sam Sherry Bigfoot, you'll find his encounter. You can read it in Stan Gordon's book, Astonishing Encounters. You can read it in Paul Johnson's book, Chasing the Pennsylvania Bigfoot. It's in the film, Seth Breedlove's documentary film, Invasion on Chestnut Ridge. And Sam's photos are actually available online. If you Google him, you can find images of him. You can see what he looked like. But a true character, somebody that I was able to get my feet wet with when I first started researching, and I learned a lot from the guy, even though he was in his later years in life. It was just a real pleasure to meet him and get out with the woods and say I was actually able to get out with a veteran Bigfoot tracker and researcher before I got in the field myself. So it was truly a real honor and blessing to know the guy.
You know, it's kind of a continuation of that process, Eric. I think he'd be pleased that you've taken a lot of researchers under your wing and showed them the way, and it's a process that continues on. Everybody asks, how do you get started in this field? And I always say, get a good teacher. Listen, pay attention, learn. And it's a tradition that continues to carry on, and I'm proud to be part of that tradition. And it's just, wish I would have got a chance to meet him. That's the only thing that sucks. I would probably have enjoyed myself tremendously.
Oh, no doubt. I think you and Henry would have really liked Sam and really had some good laughs and some good memories.
Oh, Henry always has a good laugh, don't you, Henry?
Yeah. Yeah.
Henry, what else you got, brother?
That's pretty much it.
Don't hurt yourself.
Yeah. Just everybody stay safe and stay sane during this whole craziness.
Yeah, that's kind of the chore right there, staying sane. Folks, I'm Sean the Fork Chop Forker, joined by Eric Altman and Henry May. You've been listening to the Sasquatch Experience. Henry, give them those closing words.
Y'all be good or be good at it.
And it doesn't get much better than that. Keep on squatching, folks. We'll see you next time.